Hello, welcome back to my channel, welcome back to day 3 of the Sunshine Readathon. You join me downstairs where I am about to start reading Common Bonds. I'm very excited for this. I've done some other stuff already this morning. I made some marshmallow Rice Krispie cakes. Insert B-roll of me doing that. They were very tasty. I also did some writing. Also, fit check. Give me 1 second because I'm actually dressed nicely for a change. I also have my hair up though, so like, I've gotten used to it. I'm not going to do a time lapse today because I don't want to get repetitive, but I thought it would be good to say that I'm starting Common Bonds and that I'm very excited for it. I think I'm going to try to get halfway through today, so there are 19 short stories in this, so the aim is to get to 8 by the end of today. I figure it'd be good to give a little bit more knowledge of this book before I start reading it, because I mentioned it in yesterday's video and I gave a brief introduction to it, so I thought I'll talk a bit more broadly about it. This is Common Bonds, edited together by Claudia Arsenault and a variety of other people, and it appears that every single author in this work is on the aromantic spectrum in some capacity, so they are writing from their personal experience about this. I found this book on the Storygraph A-Spec Reading Challenge because I found it was an excellent resource for finding books that other people had read and had discovered had representation of asexual or aromantic characters in some capacity, and this was listed as being one that contained aromantic characters, naturally. Claudia Arsenault is also a very well-known name within ace and aromantic story communities. She herself has written a huge number of books around a variety of identities, but particularly focusing on aro and ace identities. And she herself has compiled a huge database of books with aro-ace representation in them so that people can find more diverse works and works that centre their own experiences, which is just so cool. What an awesome person, and then she's worked with a whole variety of other people to make this a reality. But that's how I came across this. This is why I am so excited to read it. It is 19 short stories centering platonic relationships in various different forms, and it sounds awesome. So I will now get back to you when I have finished the first story. Okay, I've literally only just opened the book, but already I have to say that this is a very well done collection of stories from the looks of it. I believe this is a self-published work, or, well, group published in all likelihood, but point being, this isn't something that is commercially available, and yet in the very front, a huge list of content warnings for every single story in this, including some very niche ones that very often don't get put onto trigger warning lists, and I am so impressed by that. And then there's a beautiful foreword about the importance of platonic relationships within the aromantic community and about the fact that quite often aromantic representation is very slim, and so the attempt with this anthology is to centre the aromantic experience and to give a starting point for people who've never seen themselves represented in work before to see themselves represented, and I'm already very much looking forward to this. I will get back to you when I've finished reading some. So I have just finished the first story in Common Bonds, which is called The Aromatic Lovers by Morgan Swim, and it was just delightful. This story is fantasy-based, and it is about a non-binary person called Matois who lives in this land where everyone has a signature scent that conveys a huge amount of information about them. It conveys their pronouns, their gender identity, and various attributes that they want to be known, but Matois doesn't want that. So they end up being taken to see Dario, a master perfumist, to see what can be done about Matois' desire to not have a scent, but equally to be known as who they are. It was just adorable, and I loved the beautiful casual world building that was done. This is such a short story, it's about 20 pages long, and yet you get such a feeling of the world just from this little glimpse into Matois' life, and it was so wholesome. I really liked it. And also just the most beautiful descriptions of smells. Like, they were describing things that don't have a smell in the story, and yet you can create such a picture of what an individual character would smell like through those different things. But yeah, it's quite difficult to talk about short stories without spoiling them, obviously. This was wholesome. I really liked it. So beautifully and lovingly crafted in such a short number of pages. Loved it. I really want to read another story, and I think this is another good thing. I now have the names of a bunch of authors who have written incredibly diverse, interesting stories, so I can go and look and see if they've written other books. I'm going to be moving on to story number 2, which is called Voices in the Air by Vida Cruz. I will get back to you when I have read it. So I've just finished Voices in the Air by Vida Cruz, and I'm not sure what to make of that one. I found it fairly confusing, if I'm honest. It used a lot of words that I was unfamiliar with. The story itself seemed to be based in potentially African folklore or some kind of fantastical derivative of it. So I don't want to say these were made up words because they may well be cultural words that I'm just unfamiliar with, but either way, there was enough of sort of explanation within the story as it went on that I think it would make sense if I reread it. But as a whole, I'm not entirely sure I got the full effect of the story. However, it was plenty interesting enough. It was very atmospheric and I loved the setting as well. The setting seemed absolutely beautiful. I just didn't quite understand some of the words and so found it quite hard to grasp the meaning. This is one of my general problems with fantasy stories. As I say, I don't know whether this story was fantasy or folklore based, but I generally don't get on well with fantasy because I just don't have the patience for slow world building, fantastical words, so it may just be that this was on the slightly too high concept fantasy side for me to fully enjoy, but it was still interesting, and I believe that with a reread I would definitely be able to get more meaning from it. I'm going to read the next story now, which is called Moon Sisters by Camilla Quinn. I will see you when I have finished it. So I just finished Moon Sisters by Camilla Quinn, and oh my god, this is definitely my favourite so far. Granted, I'm 3 stories into 19 stories, but oh my god, that was adorable. That was exactly what I wanted from this collection. Moon Sisters is about a girl called Aja who is a werewolf living in modern day America, it seems, with her wolf pack in one big apartment building, and her roommate gets broken up with, so it's a very, very short story about Aja and the rest of the pack. Monty, do you mind? Hey, noisy boy. I love my dog, but also, hello. So it's just a very, very short story about Aja and the rest of the pack helping Summer cope with the breakup and making things smoother for her. It was so cute, it was adorable. It felt like sort of a one-shot or a fanfiction of a much, much longer story because, oh my god, I could so happily read a full story about this lovely, diverse pack of people, well, werewolves, who enjoy each other's company and joke around and have like a big, not polyamorous relationship, but this big found family dynamic where some of them are dating, some of them are romantically involved, others are just really, really good friends. Aja is aromantic and she says that herself, so she is just there to be in a little family unit with them, and it's just so wholesome. I adored it. This was exactly the kind of thing I wanted from the collection, and just, so wholesome, so wholesome. I'm going to read one more story before I take a break and do something else for a little bit, but this 4th story is called Cinder, and it is by Jennifer Lee Rossman. I will see you when I finish it. So I just finished reading Cinder by Jennifer Lee Rossman. Again, I loved this one. This one was so good. It was just the right amount of like silly and heartfelt, and just, I adored it. This is about a girl named Ashlyn who has been kidnapped by her wicked stepmother, or rather, her prosthetic legs have been taken by her wicked stepmother and she needs to get the hell out of there. But not to worry, because there is an app for that called Cinder, where princesses can swipe right on a prince to come and rescue them from their wicked stepmother and similar. It was just so funny and so cleverly done, to the point where it was like, this could be metaphorical, this could be like a real story about a girl being rescued from abuse and then in a similar way helping another girl from an abusive situation, which is a thing that happens, or it could just be some really like ridiculously funny fantasy world where this is just how things are. Princesses just get locked up by their stepmothers and so they go on Cinder, and it was fantastic. I adored it. I thought that the little friendship that Ashlyn strikes up with Kavya when she saves her from being stuck in a basement making wigs was just, it's so like, It was perfect. It was the perfect encapsulated small story, but again, I would so happily read a longer book about Ashlyn and Kathia going and saving girls from these situations, because they don't need a prince, they can do it themselves, even though they are both disabled women. They are both disabled women saving themselves, saving other people, and Ashlyn is aromantic and asexual, and she makes a point of saying numerous times she is not interested in princes. Equally, it'd be good to have one in a situation where your prosthetic legs have been stolen. It was great. I really loved this one as well. Right, I'm gonna take a little break from reading now because I've just read 4 short stories, which feels like a lot, although what I have next, which is called Not Quite True Love by Sil Wu, this seems like a poem rather than a story, or at least it is sort of written in a ballad form rather than standard prose, so I will probably get to that in a little bit, and I'll talk to camera then about what my thoughts were. But yeah, oh my god, Cinder was fantastic. Cinder and Moon Sisters, currently my 2 favourites of the 4 that I've read, but just this collection, this is genuinely gonna be 5-star, I think. Oh yeah, I haven't mentioned it yet. I'm reading Common Bonds because it is my pick for the Read a 5-star prediction challenge for the Readathon. It was the only book where I was like, I genuinely think I am going to give this 5 stars regardless of whether I like the majority of stories or whatever, because just the representation is fantastic, and from the quality of the writing in this already, I am just, mind is blown. I am thrilled and delighted. Anyway, I will go do some other things. I will be back when I have something more to say about books that I have read, short stories that I have read, random princes who've been swiped right on Cinder for. Fantastic. Anyway, I will see you. So it has now been a few hours since I last filmed a clip. I went upstairs and started editing this video, but I am now taking a break from that because I ran out of clips to edit, and also because I wanted to continue reading Common Bonds, and I have just finished Not Quite True Love by Sil Wu. I really liked this one. This was a poem rather than a short story, but it was really nicely done. It's in the form of an essay question about whether or not true love is what makes life worth living, and so it is put forward in these short little verses going through sort of the constitution of the question, but then also what the narrator thinks is the answer, and ends with 2 concluding statements, as in a first more emotional one, an emotional response to the question, and then in the essay form saying I disagree with the initial statement. And I just thought it was really wholesome and sweet, and it's now a poem that I really like. I've mentioned before I have a binder that I keep with my favourite poems in it, and I'm pretty sure that's going to end up in the binder. It's not a particularly complexly written poem, it's just straightforward and honest and wholesome, and I really liked it. The next story that I'm gonna read is the one with the weirdest title that I've seen so far. It's called Dracanmot, or Dracanmo, Council of Human Study Report, compiled by Usander Greystart, which is by A.Z. Louise. Weird title. I'm intrigued to see where it goes. It sounds like another sort of essay-based, report-based idea, which is going to be very different from the more standard narrative stories that I've read before, so interested? I will film another clip when I've read it. Well, I've just finished reading Dragonmo Council of Human Study, report compiled by Usander Greystart, and I really liked this one as well. I feel like I've just now got in the swing of these stories. I don't often read short stories, but this one was just so nicely done. It is done from the perspective of a report being written by Usander Greystart, who is not a human, but who is instead pretending to be a human so that they can write this report and pass it on to their council to let them know how humans live. It is set in a sort of fantasy-esque land. There are orcs, there are ogres, there are goblins, there are dragons, that kind of thing. And it has some small allegories for colonialism in there as well. And I just thought it was quite wholesome more than anything, because you have this complete outsider learning how humans work, and one of the humans they meet, named Elliot, is aromantic, and so as a result Usander learns about human connections and social interactions, and there is quite a plot twist at the end when Usander's identity is revealed, and there are some lovely little tropes within the asexual and aromantic community that get played on, which I thought was spot on. I thought this was probably the most well-rounded story in terms of it felt like a completely contained narrative within it, as in up until the last sentence a story was being created, and I just thought it was really sweet. I really liked it. I will now read the next story, which is Space Girl and the Martian by Cora Ruskin, and I will talk to you when I've finished it. Location has changed once again because although I was initially downstairs reading and my parents had closed the door while they made supper, I couldn't pretend that that was enough to actually muffle all the sounds of the pots and pans, so I thanked them very much for being considerate and then came upstairs to film this next bit. So I just finished reading Space Girl and the Martian by Cora Ruskin, and this was another one where it was just wholesome. Not one of my favourites, not one of the ones where I'm like, this really tugged at my heartstrings, but it was really sweet. This is about a girl known as Space Girl who became a superhero when she got to her 18th birthday and learned that she had the power to manipulate gravity. And it is about a showdown against her arch nemesis, the Martian, who has the same powers as her, and about a brief conversation that she then has with a fellow superhero at their superheroes only bar about whether or not it is nature or nurture that makes you a superhero or a supervillain. You know, that kind of thing of, are you born good, are you born bad, is it about the choices you make, is it about the way you are, all that kind of thing, and it leads to her discovering the identity of her arch nemesis and them choosing not to pick a side necessarily. I thought it was just very wholesome. It was a very different type of relationship to the ones that have been explored thus far. It was still a platonic relationship, but there was another element to it, and it was very wholesome. I liked what it had to say, and I liked the sort of subversive take on a superhero trope. I just love subverting tropes, and this did it so nicely. I very much enjoyed it. I'm going to read one more story for the day because that takes me up to the 8 that I promised to read, and this one is called Would You Like Charms With That by E.H. Timms, so I will get back to you when I finish reading it. I have just finished reading Would You Like Charms With That, and this one really touched my heart. This is the one story I've read so far where I actually thought I might tear up reading it. It was so beautiful. This was a sort of fantasy setting, like, when I say fantasy setting, I mean like sort of D&D fantasy setting, roughly medieval kind of feeling with dwarves and elves and that kind of thing. So within this fantasy setting, this is the story of a queer platonic couple of a mage and a warrior who run a weapons shop. The mage is not explicitly a woman. She uses she, her pronouns, but she explicitly says that she is not a girl. She's just a person who uses she, her pronouns. And the warrior is also a woman. And the story begins when a young person that they know comes to the door and talks about how hard it was to have broken up with a friend of theirs, because all three of the people in this scenario are in some way Arrow and Ace. And so Robin, the mage, talks about how she ended up finding her partner, Callie, and talking about how difficult it is to build a life with someone, but how rewarding it is. It was just so beautiful to see a life not built on romance or sex be portrayed as something so natural and so right. There is never any questioning of whether or not Kit should want a queer platonic relationship. It is just, if they want it, they can have it. And Callie and Robin's relationship is just treated as so entirely natural, and the way they both treat Kit, not as their child, but as someone they deeply care about. Yeah, it made me emotional reading it, just because getting to read a story in which not romance, but something adjacent to that kind of deep connection that you can have with an individual, it just felt so healing in a way to read that kind of story, to have it treated as completely normal and healthy, but to talk about the logistics of it in a completely realistic way, but in such a tender way as well. Robin and Callie's relationship is just wholesome and loving. It's just loving, but not with romance involved, and yeah, I want to cry having read it. It was just so sweet and wholesome, and Yeah, it made me feel things. That is the one that has got to me the most. That is probably the story I would give to someone to read if they didn't understand aromanticism or queer platonic relationships or anything like that, because it gave me a lot of feelings. That is my reading done for now. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been interesting hearing me talk about this book, because this is a book that I feel so genuinely passionate about as a thing that exists. I think it is so fantastic that a book like this exists with so many diverse and interesting stories all about aromanticism and platonic relationships and this facet of life that isn't rooted in romantic attraction or romantic relationships. And so it feels really great to be able to share it and to talk about it more so that other people can potentially find things like this and find these kinds of resources in many ways, but just as stories as well, just as really good, fun, beautiful things to read. Thank you very much for watching. If you did like this video, please give it a like. Comment down below if you're reading anything good at the moment, because it's always good to hear, and especially let me know if you're interested in any of the short stories that I mentioned, because it said at some point in either the acknowledgements or the foreword of this book that some of these stories are available online in different forms. I will have to check that, but if they do indeed exist in some capacity online, I will put links in the description of this video so that other people can read them, because they're fantastic. Feel free to subscribe if you are interested in more of my bookish content. I am making a video every single day this week until Saturday as part of the Sunshine Readathon, so if you feel like sticking around to see me talk more about Common Bonds, because it will be what I'm reading tomorrow and the other books that I am planning to read, subscribing will be the best way to see them. But yeah, thank you very much, and I will see you tomorrow.